All right, everybody, what's going on? Friday, back in the saddle. Recorded the last two Friday, full auto Fridays, well before I went out to the Origin Camp. So it's been a little bit. And today's episode is brought to you by all of you listening or watching this episode. If you are watching it, you can see I'm wearing a brand new Cleared Hot shirt. I'm calling it the Matchstick shirt because I'm super original, and it has a match on it, a matchstick. It's on fire that says Cleared Hot on top. So why do I say it's brought to you by you guys? Because the unbelievable support that I have received from the podcast comes directly from the listeners and those that watch. And I could not be more thankful for people who, one, tune in, and then two, actually want to fly the flag, metaphorically, obviously, and tell other people about it. So I have nothing but appreciation and thanks for all of you. Today's episode is brought to you by you, and it's for you. But let's get into it. And before we get into it, it's not going to be a traditional Full Auto Friday. And I'll explain why when we begin. We're going to cover just one topic and one topic only. Here we go. Full Auto Friday, 121.
Okay, got the red smoke.
Gun run, north to south, west of the smoke, west of the smoke.
Okay, copy. West of the smoke. I'm looking at danger close now.
Come on with it, baby. Give it to me. I need it. You're cleared hot.
Copy, cleared hot.
Well, hello, everybody. Like I said in the intro, today's episode is going to be slightly different. Sometimes I see an opportunity to discuss something, an issue or a question that I'm getting a large volume of, and today is one of those opportunities. There was recently a New York Times article that was covering what I would call the circumstances around one of the candidates' deaths, and they interviewed the candidate's mother and some other unnamed people from the SEAL community, instructor, staff, etc. And I received a huge volume of emails asking for my thoughts. And I know that previously I had briefly discussed my thoughts on what had happened based on the information that I had. And I'm going to read one email that I think encapsulates the vast majority of the questions. And I'm going to point out a few things in the article. And then I'll probably open with what I'm going to close with. It seems like there is a lot of information that is still yet to come out, and I hope that people can remain objective, maintain their objectivity until a more complete picture can actually be painted. It even references it in the article. It says that there's going to be findings that are released in the fall, and they're going to brief the individual's family first, which I think is exactly the way it should be. Let's start with the email, and then I will pull up the article. People who want to read the article can do it themselves. It was written by Dave Phillips, who is a writer for the New York Times. I've actually talked with him on the phone one time. I'm trying to get him onto the podcast and just have an open discussion about a lot of the coverage that he's done on the SEAL community. It's more than many have, and so I think it would be a fascinating conversation. Maybe that'll be for another time. Hopefully he can make the trip up to Kalispell. But so if you want to read, I'm not going to read the whole article. The reason I bring up where it is and who it was written by is so you can Google it yourself. I'm going to read this email that speaks to that article, and I will answer the questions in the email first, and then I want to point out a few things in the article itself, and then we will get into our weekend. So here we go. The email reads, I'm going to skip all of the bullshit of my and there I was balls deep in honor, courage, and commitment story and just cut to the chase. I found myself at Buds in 2017 in the best shape of my life and confident. I was surprised that I was in the top 10% of performers at the prep course. By the time I was in the third week of phase, and it doesn't say which phase, but I'll assume first phase, I had lost roughly 20 pounds and my knees felt like they were about to fall off every time I attempted to stand up, not to mention the cinder blocks I had hidden somewhere in my thighs. I wasn't the only one. I would estimate that 2 out of 10 trainees were experiencing similar physiological responses to such a large load of physical activity. The remaining 8 trainees, the ones who were not having the same experiences I was, are the ones that stood out. I am not here to say that 80% of my class was cheating, but what I am saying is that they were either gifted by God himself or they were doing something different. I am reaching out in regards to the latest New York Times article regarding doping in training. The SEAL teams are all about upholding the highest of standards, something that I adopted in my own life from a young age and have always admired about the teams. My question to you is this. If the teams expected to uphold the highest of standards to ensure that the right men make it through the pipeline, then why is the Navy not testing for T, which I'm assuming is testosterone, HGH, human growth hormone, and SARMs, which is, I think I know what that is, but I'm not even going to hazard a guess. We'll just call it a performance-enhancing substance. Do you think the quality of candidates is diminished when the majority of the ones making it through the program are doping? Finally, do you think that the man who dopes and is fresh and recovered for every single evolution is as vetted and tested as the man who is beat to the shit by the time Hell Week rolls around? Which man would you rather serve with? Thank you for your time. I've been a long-time listener since the beginning. Big fan. So, brings up some interesting questions and some interesting points. I'm not here to say that 80% of my class was cheating, but what I am saying is that they were either gifted by God himself or they are doing something different. Or they had a different physiological response to the stimulus that you did. I saw this all the time as a BUD/S instructor and all the time as a CrossFit gym owner. You can hit people with the same stimulus and differences in height and weight and genetics, which I'm sorry, and I know it's unfair. Some people are gifted, some people are not. The point in all that is people respond differently to the stimulus that they are presented with. So you were in this case, unfortunately, the statistical group that wasn't responding to it well. And most people don't. I understand the physical demands of BUD/S and what can happen there and how difficult it can be. But your experience and the way that you and this other trainee, the similarities that you have, it doesn't necessarily paint anything about the other students. Maybe they were doing something different, or maybe they just were different. Like I said, 10 people, identical stimulus, it's not going to net you one result. Maybe some people had a different physiological background when it came to a training regimen leading up to this. The only way that you can really make a statement like the one that you did is if you actually collected some data and had a really good understanding of what they did before and who they were before starting. So just be cautious with saying that there's only two options there. I think there's actually quite a few. Why is the Navy not testing for testosterone? And we'll just call it performance-enhancing drugs. I know this isn't correct to say this, but I'm going to say steroids. I'm going to use that as a blanket term for the three things that you brought up: testosterone, human growth hormone, and SARMs, SARMs, what I'll call them. From my understanding, and I am not a fucking expert at this by any stretch, these are a much more difficult test to administer than just a basic urinalysis. A basic urinalysis, for those of you that don't know, doesn't test for any of those things. So to test for those, it's a much more specific test, and I have no idea if there's a cost associated with that or a timeline associated with that. What I will say is it's not the easiest testing mechanism in comparison to the urinalysis. Is that a reason not to do it? No, it's not a reason at all. What I would say is if anybody in a leadership position feels like there's an issue with any type of substances, I don't care what boundaries or barriers are in front of you, you should be testing for them. So I don't actually have an answer as to why they are not. Perhaps the leadership doesn't think it is the issue that the article portrays it to be. Perhaps they are unable to do so for some reason. The reality is I just don't know. But I would hope that high-quality leadership would recognize if there is a trend and it's a red flare going up in the air and drawing attention, that maybe you should allocate some assets and energy in that direction. So as far as the questions that you asked, that's the one that I probably know the least about it. Do you think that the quality of a candidate is diminished when the majority of the ones making it through the program are doping? My question back to you would be, how do you know that the majority of the ones making it through the program are doping? You don't. It's an easy assumption to make based off of the article that was written, and I will discuss that when I read portions of the article or address certain portions of the article. But the reality is, as the person writing this email, you don't know that the majority of the ones making through this program are doping. If there are people in the class that are doping, are they indicative of the rest of the class as a whole? My guess would be no, but I'm also detached from the community, and I'm bouncing what I am hearing from people who are in the community and proximal to the training environment. And I'm bouncing that against or balancing that with what I'm reading in open source press, because I was able to get access to the article just like everybody else was. What I would say, I look back at my own time at Buds, and the Wayback Time Machine, January of '97, when training started for me. I'm sure I knew what steroids were because I definitely had seen a picture of Arnold Schwarzenegger at some point in time and realized that that's not the natural physique or physiology of a human being. But taking steroids at the age of 18 was not something that I had ever even considered. I actually also really don't like needles, so that is something else for me, that a hurdle that would have to be gotten over. But if I go back to the training environment that I personally went through, which is the only one that I can speak about from experience. And let me be very clear. I have a hazy memory of Buds because it was so long ago, and I think the human body does a great job, or the brain perhaps, of erasing painful things and just kind of letting your body let go of it so you don't have to agonize over it. I do think it would be different, though, if you had, we'll call it a clean, or what would be a better word than clean? Or maybe clean is the word. A clean candidate and a doping candidate. I'll try to use that terminology for the rest of the episode. The evolutions are the same. The performance and recovery would absolutely be different. So do I think that the quality of the candidate is diminished when I'm not going to use the term majority, when some of those who are making it through are doping? I think yes, because the training itself, it's not about running or swimming or doing the obstacle course or staying awake for 5 days during Hell Week or doing pool comp or going out to the island and getting your first intro to small unit tactics and weaponry and explosives. It's about all of that. And it's about the totality of all of that, the stress of all of that, the burden of all of that, and whether or not the individual can tolerate those things. Whether you can follow procedure when you're exhausted, when you are completely and utterly stressed out. And if you are doing things that is allowing your body to abnormally recover or abnormally perform, the stimulus is not going to be the same. How much is the candidate diminished? I don't know the answer to that because I really don't know. I don't know how much of a performance bump or a recovery bump you actually get, because I think it would probably depend on what it is you're taking and how long you've been taking it for and what you're taking it with. But I do think, based on my own experience, having gone through the training, it would be a different experience, and therefore there is a chance that somebody who normally would not have made it through the program would be able to hang on because their body was in a better condition than the candidate going through clean. Ties into your next question. Finally, do you think that the man who dopes and is fresh and recovered for every single evolution is as vetted and tested as the man who is beat up or beat to shit by the time Hell Week rolls around? And which man would you rather serve with? I would rather serve with a clean candidate to work myself backwards. If you think that you need to dope to make it through Buds, it is my personal opinion that you have absolutely no business attempting that pipeline, because you don't need to dope to make it through Buds. Is Buds really difficult? Yes, it is. Do the vast majority of people who attempt training not make it through the program? Correct. They do not. That's the way it's supposed to be. We are, not we, because I'll have to use the term royal we. I'm very detached from the community. I'm no longer current by any stretch, shape, or form. The curriculum is very precise, and the evolutions that exist for a reason. And it really hasn't changed since the inception of the training program. And I'll talk to that when I speak to the article here a little bit. If you need to dope to make it through that program, you are completely fucked later on in your career. Buds is a very controlled environment in comparison to the occupational environment of actually being a SEAL and deploying globally, and depending on the unit or command that you are at short notices as well. You know, Buds is largely Monday through Friday. You are going to get evenings off. You're going to get weekends off. except for Hell Week, and you have the opportunity to put yourself on a pretty controlled regimen that is going to vaporize when you become an operational SEAL. I would absolutely rather serve with a person that is clean. The person who is assisting their recovery and performance, in my personal opinion, no, they are not as vetted because they are not experiencing the curriculum in the manner with which it was designed to be applied. And if you're listening to me say that and you're thinking, well, yeah, but I can increase my odds of graduation if I can just dope while I'm there and then I'll get off of it. I'm telling you right now, you don't belong in the SEAL community, because at some point in time, that is probably going to come around to bite you. And the crucible that you are trying to modify due to enhanced performance and recovery is a fraction of the pain and difficulty that the career field is. And unless you plan on spending your entire life taking these substances, which I don't think is a very good idea, and I'm not a doctor for clarity, at some point in time, the tail is going to catch up with you. And in my experience, when that type of thing happens, it's not going to probably be you that is hurt or potentially killed. It'll be somebody else. And that's just not something that I think should be tolerated. So if you feel like you have to dope to make it through buds, I would highly recommend that you find a different career field, because it's not for you. So those were the questions that were in the email itself. The article, like I said, you can find it at a variety of places at this point. Dave or David Phillips, it was written by the New York Times. If you don't have, or he wrote it for the New York Times. If you don't have an account, I think you can sign up for a free one, or you can, it's been reposted in a few places, so you can kind of search for it if you want to. Now that email that covered like the 90% of the questions that I received. And now specifically when it comes to this incident, I'm looking at the article now. Mullen was the last name of the individual who died while in the training pipeline. Let's start with this. And I think I said this when I was briefly talking about how I felt about this. It sucks. It's a catastrophic loss of life. And I don't want anybody to die in SEAL training. I also don't want anybody to die being a SEAL operationally. I can only imagine how the family feels about this, and I have nothing but empathy for them. I wish it hadn't happened. And there were some comments made, I'll read one here in a second, from his mom, and I don't believe them to be accurate, and I also don't believe them to be extremely educated when it comes to the subject matter that she is talking about, and that's okay, because I can only imagine how she feels, the frustration, the anger, and the hurt, and all I have for that is empathy. So I have no desire to tit for tat go back and forth with a family member of somebody who lost their life in training. But I will highlight a few things that I think are, I don't know the correct term. I'll use the term inaccurate when it comes to describing what it is they're actually talking about. Probably one of the main questions that I got, was, can they make buds so safe that nobody would die in training? And I think the answer is that they could, but the curriculum would no longer be the same. I don't want anybody to die while they are in SEAL training. But I think, and it says in the article, I believe that there have been 11 deaths since the inception of SEAL training. It's fucking horrendous. But if it had been 0, then the community would not be shepherding itself appropriately. They would not be training at a level, at a difficulty that was indicative or could replicate the stress of the occupation in an operational environment, which at the end of the day, you have to remember that is what we are selecting for. We're not necessarily looking for people who can just make it through buds. We're looking for people who can become and grow into amazing SEALs. And to do that, you have to be able to handle the demands of the battlefield. So I don't want anybody to die in training, but if you reduce the risk to 0 of it happening, you are now modifying the standard, and the end result that you are going to get out of that is a path that I don't think anybody should go down. So let's talk about the first thing that jumped out to me. Seaman Mullen's mom, she's quoted in this article saying that they killed him. They say it's training, but it's torture, and they didn't even give him the proper medical care. They treat these guys worse than they are allowed to treat prisoners of war. I can understand how it could feel that way from somebody looking at it from an outside perspective. You have to remember that the BUDS training program is a volunteer program. At any point in time, an individual can remove themselves from that training. There are 0 evolutions in BUDS that are designed to kill anybody. But nearly every evolution in BUDS is designed to test people or incrementally drive somebody towards their limits to then see what they do. Do they give in to their emotional state? Can they maintain their objectivity? Do they panic or do they follow procedure? My experience as a student and my experience as a BUDS instructor is that medical care was available at all times. But again, those were only my experiences, and I am very dated as to the current training which is going on right now. But specifically Hell Week, the evolution that this individual died shortly after completing, I didn't realize the safety net that existed as a student, but as an instructor, it is everywhere, and the students are very, very closely watched. Again, I can understand how his mother would feel this way, but unfortunately, I don't think she is necessarily correct in her assessment of the treatment of students. We don't treat students in a manner that we are not allowed to treat prisoners of war. And for clarity, it's very clear how U.S. forces in general, not just SEALs, are allowed to treat prisoners of war. They're actually treated pretty fucking well. The training that these individuals have volunteered for and volunteer to continue at every morning, at the start of training and at every evolution that they continue is, yes, physically arduous and much more painful than a prisoner of war should be exposed to. Don't forget that they are seeking that out, and don't forget what it is that you are selecting, screening, and refining for. There's another thing here in particular that I wanted to talk about. Okay. I don't care about people's beliefs. When it comes to political beliefs, sitting on the left-hand side of the aisle, the right-hand side of the aisle, none of that actually means anything to me. I think I can find common ground with almost anybody. And I also don't think that somebody's political beliefs define who they are as a human being. I think we can be a little bit more nuanced than that. Journalists, you can see some that obviously sit on the left and some that sit on the right, and I don't care about that either. Because I want people, it's the beauty of expression in our country, right? If you sit on the right, you can view things from a lens that is maybe more adjacent to the right, and you can write from your perspective and your optic. If you sit on the left, you can do the same thing and you can write the same way. All I try to do when I read things that are open source like this is I try to think about the individual who is writing it, what it is that they are trying to convey, and where it is maybe that they are writing from. And left or right, I don't care what side you land on, it's really easy to write an article or write something where you either omit or choose to not include, which might be another way of just saying omit, information that could shift your objectivity or your lens more back towards the center line. And there's something very specific in here that I want to address. I'm going to read these 2 paragraphs. The Navy has made hundreds of changes over the years meant to improve safety and increase graduation rates. At the same time, the SEALs who run the course have quietly resisted anything they see as lowering the standards. So no matter how much the Navy has tried to make BUDS easier, it seems to only get harder. In the 1980s, about 40% of candidates graduated. Over the past 25 years, the average has dropped to 26%. In 2021, it was just 14%, and in Seaman Mullen's class this year, less than 10%. Now, it would be very easy to look at that through the lens of there is something insidious and malicious going on in SEAL training. And I think that is the absolute incorrect lens to look at it from. And again, this is only my opinion. I was there as an instructor, as the Navy, Greater Navy, SEAL community, and those in charge of the BUDS pipeline we're messing with the formula. It has been messed with to a degree, slightly, making, not going to, if you have a stereo equalizer in front of you and you have 100 different levers that you can move up and down, they're not going to slam all 100 up or all 100 down. They might move one or two. One of the big things they started doing was screening people for, what's the word I'm looking for? Hobbies, physical activities and hobbies. It was a written test that they were trying to get more insight about the candidates that were successful at BUD/S so they could go back and recruit from those communities, which is a change that they didn't do. Nobody fucking asked me about anything when I was going through BUD/S. So like, hey, you're still here today? Awesome. What's your name? I've never seen you before. I'm like, perfect. I'm doing my job well. I wanted to be the gray man. They have been trying to increase graduation rates. Throughput. And one way that they can look at doing that is they could increase the number of people that start each class. They can't really add any more classes because the schedule is as compressed as it can be and there's overlap in the classes. So you could look at doing it that way. Or you could change, they did a pre-training program. They had almost a 16-week pipeline before BUD/S even began to prep people. And these are all changes that have been made. The SEALs who run the course have quietly resisted anything they see as lowering the standards. I would objectively say, in my experience, that is completely untrue. The community itself doesn't want to see the standards modified to a degree that is going to change the end product. It's not a matter of the SEALs who run the course that have an issue with this. It's everybody. I take that back. I'm not going to use the word everybody. The vast majority of people, as a matter of fact, I can't think of a single person who made it to the point of being issued a trident and having their NEC changed in the system would say, you know what? We need to modify the training to get more guys out, or we need to modify the training to lower the standards. Nobody's going to say that because they understand what it is, what the purpose is of that selection and training program, and what those people are going to be expected to do. No matter how much the Navy has tried to make BUD/S easier, it seems to only get harder. And then it was followed by these statistics. In the 80s, 40% graduated. Over the past 25 years, the average has dropped to 26%. In 2021, it was just 14%. And in Seaman Mullen's class this year, so I'm assuming 2022, it was less than 10%. What is left out of this article? For one, the vast majority of attrition occurs before or during Hell Week. And I have a good friend who had a son that was in this Hell Week class who successfully made it through. And what is left out of this article is that it was unseasonably cold in San Diego during this particular Hell Week and in the phase leading up to it. And let me tell you what happens in winter classes and when the temperature is lower. A lot of people DOR or drop on request. So it's not necessarily an indication that the training is getting harder. It's an incomplete perspective. You're just saying, only 10%. Yeah, but let's look at why. I'm going to take this into an even different direction. Let us assume for a second that since the inception of SEAL training, it has changed very little, that the training curriculum itself has not deviated very much. My point in saying that is, if the curriculum has stayed the same throughout its history, but the attrition rate is increasing, perhaps we should start taking a look at the people who are attempting the program as opposed to the curriculum being applied. 40% of candidates back in the 80s, and I'm sure I just recorded a podcast with Greg Anderson. It'll come out in a couple weeks, and we talked about this briefly. There's a reason why they call previous generations, or specifically one generation, the greatest generation. And these were some of the hardest motherfuckers on the face of the earth. It wouldn't surprise me if 40% of those candidates graduated. It wouldn't surprise me if more than 40% of candidates from that era graduated. But let's take an objective look at our society in the last 30 years, specifically maybe the last 10 to 15, or actually let's just say 2000 and beyond. Are we as a society rewarding those who seek adversity? Are we rewarding those and training and teaching and mentoring people to make themselves as physically and mentally hard as humanly possible? So regardless of whatever adversity life throws at them, they are capable of handling it? in the modern day right now, the 1st of September in 2022, how do the candidates who are beginning training line up against those from the 1980s? My completely anecdotal opinion that doesn't count for shit other than what I saw as a student and again went back and saw as a BUD/S instructor is they're not the same. And I personally, one of my biggest concerns is that we as a fucking society are as soft as we have ever been and as least tolerant to adversity as we have ever been. So it's really easy to look at this stat and say, you know what? Something malicious is happening in BUD/S. It's the instructors. There's something happening there. They're trying to make it harder. That's one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is most people in this day and age are fucking soft. And there's no other way to put it than that. The medical treatment, there's a lot of speaking about, whether medical treatment was administered when it should have been. I can't even comment on that because, like I said, I'm very dated and I don't necessarily know what is in place at this point in time. My experience is it was the opposite of that, and there was actually a really large safety net that was invisible to most of the students. It's really easy, especially if you spend a lot of time talking to people who were unsuccessful in the training pipeline, to paint a very unfair, malicious, skewed perspective of the training. And it's really easy to blame the training or anything other than the individual himself who decided to quit, because that would require people to take accountability and responsibility for their actions. It said in the article, and I can't really find it right now, where they're talking about, instructors made students quit. Let me tell you, I tried every version of making a student quit, but I can't make a student actually sign the DOR paperwork. And I had very tight left and right boundaries on what I was able to do with either remediation or the evolution itself. It's really easy to say as somebody who didn't make it through, or there's a parent quoted in here as well, whose son did not make it through and ended up jumping into a tail rotor of a helicopter. It's like, holy fuck, I can't even imagine anything worse than that. But them saying they made him quit. And the reality is that's very likely not the case. Nobody can make you quit. The only person who is in control as to whether or not you graduate the SEAL training pipeline is yourself. The number one feeling that I had expressed to me from students who had just quit when I was an instructor was regret. They still had those feelings years later, half a decade later when I bounced into them, and I get it. It's a lot easier to shed that off and say somebody forced me to do it than eating the really difficult pill and saying, you know what, I made that choice myself and it's not actually anybody else's fault. In the article, they're asking for, the mother's asking for oversight of BUD/S training. Sure, I don't think there's anything wrong with oversight and transparency, especially if you have nothing to hide. I do think you should probably have people watching it who have an idea of what it is that they're actually looking for, and there's people who are smarter than me and they can create teams and figure out who's that's going to be. But I would at least have the people watching at least having some idea of what's actually happening. It mentioned it here that, some of the instructors were quietly removed after the death, and I actually have nothing but questions about that. I'd be curious who actually was removed. Was the leadership removed? Were individual instructors removed? And for the person that wrote this saying, that they were quietly removed, I hate to tell you, it actually kind of happens all the time. People will be removed from a training billet, and there's not a press release on it, so I don't necessarily know what would be expected from the family members. And those are questions that you may never get answers to, and that sucks. But having people removed without making much of a to-do about it is not actually that uncommon. And the military, I hate to tell you, like I said, is not going to send out a press release saying, hey, this is the person that was removed and this is the reasons for it. And that's about as far as I want to get into the article. Hopefully that answers the questions for the people who had reached out to me. Again, it kind of relays out the foundation of how I feel about what happened and how I feel about SEAL training. You know, the drug thing is an interesting one. And when I had Matthew Cole on, he kind of alluded, maybe he knows this individual, the writer, Phillips. Maybe they had been talking about it. He asked me, you know, how many people do you think in your class were on steroids? Again, to use the broad term. And it kind of, I hadn't thought about it because from my own experience, which is all I have, I never once thought about it. Maybe that's because I was 18 though. And, you know, I didn't need any more testosterone at that point in time in my life. But the program exists for a reason. The criteria is what it is for a reason. And I'll close with this. For people listening to this who are considering this career path, and I know I'm repeating myself here a little bit, but I think it's important. You don't need to dope to make it through buds. You're supposed to be exhausted. You are supposed to be sore. You are supposed to be questioning your life choices. And the best thing that I can tell you is that if you're gonna need to take drugs or to dope or to cheat to make it through training, you're going to have a rude awakening when you get to the actual community itself. You can pay the price up front and potentially not make it through, or you can pay the price later on. And maybe that's from extended use of these things, the doping chemicals, or the realization that, holy shit, buds was actually not that fucking hard in comparison to what we're actually going to be asked to do in this community. So if you're on the fence, if you're thinking about buds and you're thinking that you need to dope to make it through, don't even try. You don't belong there. You don't need to dope. You shouldn't be doping. And if you don't make it through, that's okay. They will let you come back. Will you maybe have to do a shitty billet in between? Yes, you may have to do that. But you know what? You might gain in that time life experience, the ability to train differently so that when you come back, you'll have a much higher likelihood of success because you know what you're getting into and you're better prepared for it. The answer to buds is not in a syringe. And that's all I'll leave you with. See you Monday.